Welcome to study number 31 in 1 Samuel chapter 31, verses 1 through 13, the final chapter of the book of 1 Samuel. And we've seen the transition from the Judges through Ruth and into 1 Samuel, where Samuel was actually the final judge of Israel and established the kingdom under King Saul and the kings of Israel. And now we'll see how Saul is going to meet his end, which will then result in David becoming king of Israel. And that's the summary, really, of what this book of 1 Samuel is all about. So let's get into the text of this final chapter of 1 Samuel with a word of prayer. And Father, we thank you for bringing us through this entire book. Of course, I'd love to be raptured before we can finish. But as long as you leave us here, we want to be found faithful, occupying until you come, with the help of your Holy Spirit, learning this book, talking to others and teaching this book, living by this book. May you help us to do these things for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So verse 1 of the final chapter of the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 31. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. That's not good. This would have never happened to an Israelite king or the nation, except the king and a good portion, at least, of the nation just aren't right with God. And under Saul's leadership, the Lord is now lifting his hand of protection and not giving Israel the victory. And David will say every time he wins a battle, he'll say that the victory belongs to the Lord, the battle belongs to the Lord, salvation belongs unto the Lord. Verse 2 says, and the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. We don't know a whole lot about Abinadab or Malchishua, but we know that Jonathan was a young man of integrity. He was a man of loyalty to those who were true to the Lord and true to him, as David was. I look forward to meeting Jonathan in glory one day, and we'll see how hard this death hits David in the next study, Lord willing, when we start 2 Samuel chapter 1. But we'll leave that for that time, Lord willing, as I said. Verse 3, and the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Saul is fatally wounded, but he's not going to die quickly. And how many times you heard about that? Someone's shot or wounded and they take him to the hospital and sometimes linger in serious condition or even critical condition, be in that ICU, intensive care unit, and then still die days later, weeks later even. Think of Charlie Kirk, who I certainly believe is with the Lord now. And if you're watching this way years ahead, if the Lord's left us here and you're watching this video, I hope you know who Charlie Kirk is and people haven't forgotten him. He was I don't endorse all of his doctrinal positions that I heard him talk about, but most of them, he was sound, he was biblical, he preached a biblical gospel, a biblical Jesus, and biblical morality. And he was shot and killed, and he didn't survive probably more than a few minutes. He was dead from the time that bullet hit him in the neck. And they did wait until they got him to the hospital, pronounce him dead, but it wasn't very long at all. Compare that to other stories. My Uncle Larry told me a story about when he was working at a steel mill, and I'll avoid being any more specific than that. I don't want to conjure up bad memories for anybody who might hear this and know about what happened, but they had these huge buckets of molten steel, and somehow one of them got bumped really hard or hit something, and that stuff splashed out, And as it came down to the ground, just in the amount of time it took to fall, it hardened, and it hit that cold cement floor, and then boom, it was like a shrapnel. It was like a grenade going off. And there was only a couple of guys in the area at the time, and one of them was riddled with that stuff. But he stayed on his feet for a few minutes. They shut everything off, set off the alarm, that says there's been an accident. People came running in, and he was saying, "Oh, I think I'm going to be all right. I think I'm going to be all right." And my uncle, who had been in Vietnam and seen things, well, some of the other guys there were joking and laughing and carrying on like, "Oh, well, here." And Larry walked up, he said he walked up to a couple of them. He said, "Hey, man, you need to understand, that he's a dead man. He ain't going to survive that." They said, "What?" And sure enough, by the time the paramedics got there, he was unconscious, and then they took him to the hospital and pronounced him dead shortly after. I don't tell that to be morbid or anything, but it's just something that I think a lot of people don't realize. When you see accidents, I hope you never do. I don't ever want to be in that situation. But Saul, in this condition, he's a dead man walking, so to speak. Verse 4 says, "Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, Draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it." Saul is accurate about the fact that these wicked Canaanite Philistines, they find him, they're going to torture him before he dies as much as they can. That's just the way, that's the reality of war throughout human history. With, the United States military, although we've had our guys doing some things that they shouldn't do, but nothing compared to what most armies do when they conquer. It's just terrible. As I'm recording this, Tucker Carlson, who's become a terrible human being, and he thinks he's deceived. He thinks he's standing up for what's right, and he's accusing Donald Trump of saying, since Donald Trump called for the unconditional surrender of Iran, Tucker's seriously telling people that means that the American soldiers can go in and rape the wives and daughters of the Iranian men. And that's never happened. We didn't do it. We've never done it. Has there ever been a rape by a military man in uniform for the United States? Absolutely, of course, human beings. But as a state of policy and any sort of mass situation like Tucker is indicating, never happened. Didn't happen in the Revolutionary War, didn't happen in the War of 1812, didn't happen in the Civil War, didn't happen in World War I, didn't happen in World War II, didn't happen in Vietnam, didn't happen in Korea, hasn't happened in any of the Gulf Wars and skirmishes and the wars I had left out. It's never happened. But normally it would, and it has throughout human history. And I think the armor bearer probably had a healthy fear of God. It's as David said, in 1 Chronicles 16:22, which is the same as Psalm 105:15, saying, "Touch not mine anointed and do my prophets no harm." You just didn't do that. You weren't going to plunge your sword into the king. And by the way, that text isn't about criticizing heretical or immoral pastors. Touch not mine anointed. It's about God literally having anointed with oil through the prophets his king. And of course, the ultimate king, anointed one, is the Messiah. And so it says, "Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it." He took matters into his own hands, and some harshly criticized Saul here for cowardice and committing suicide. It's not really suicide in this case. Suicide is taking your life prematurely and that sort of thing. Out in war, you just haven't done a lot of study and reading of war if you think this is kind of unheard of. And what they do today is, instead of allowing the Muslims to take you as prisoner and sodomize you and abuse you, which they did to the Jews that they took on October 7, 2023, for example, instead all you have to do is stand out and lift your gun up toward them, your rifle toward them, and just stand there, and they're going to fill you full of holes. You're going to be dead in a matter of seconds. That's, again, I'm not trying to be morbid or anything, but that's the reality of warfare. And when you're up against certain enemies, you do not want to go alive. It's to the death. So I'm not too harsh on Saul doing this at this moment. He did plenty of wrong. But verse 5 says, and when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him, because they knew they'd abuse him as badly as they would have Saul. And he's probably out of his head with fear at this point. So again, don't be too hard on this kid, this young man. You can think less of Saul, that's fine, but especially this kid. I mean, he's probably in heaven. At least I hope so. Verse 6, so Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men that same day together, just wiped out. Again, as of the time of this recording, the Trump administration wiped out the Ayatollah and the top 40 advisors and leaders in that country, all in a day. And if that turns out to be, maybe it's a little less or maybe it's a little more, but around 40 plus Ayatollah, gone. That doesn't happen very often in times of war, but that's what happened here. Saul, his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men, just gone. Verse 7, though, shows it's not all the Israelites, not all of his men, as in all of his army, but these are his close, like his war cabinet and his security team and everything. Verse 7 says, and when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were on the other side Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled. See, so there wasn't every Israelite, but the close team that Saul had basically surrounded him with was killed. The rest fled. And that Saul and his sons were dead. They forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So this is disastrous for Israel. Huge loss at that moment in time. It reminds me, I've read a lot about the Civil War, and most people are totally clueless about how actually the Civil War went down. And I was, until I started reading over and above what I'd been taught in school and seen in documentaries and such. The war itself went from 1861 to 1865. But a lot of people don't realize in those first couple of years, the North thought they were going to lose. They didn't believe it was lost, but they thought it was a losing cause. And they were calling on Abraham Lincoln to appeal for peace and to go ahead and split the Union. And in the North, this was called the Copperhead Movement. Newspaper men, which was like the internet of that day. You controlled the newspaper, you controlled the narrative. Horace Greeley in New York, and a William Story in Chicago, and all their other little papers that they influenced, they were all lamenting the losses at the first and second battles of Bull Run, which was it's in the Manassas National Battlefield in Virginia. You can go and visit those places. McClellan failed to take Richmond, and it was just, as a matter of fact, I mean, I don't know really of anyone who disagrees with what I'm about to say, but if the South had had as many men and as much money, not even as many, but just close to as many men and as much money and as many warehouses to put out, ammunition and guns and such and cannons and everything, the North wouldn't have stood a chance if it was an even fight. The reason the North won is because they had 2-3 times everything, and they could just throw everything at the South, and that's why they won. I'm not sorry that the North won, by the way. I just believe the war was unnecessary. 600,000 men were killed, up to 2 million total casualties when you throw in all the civilian deaths and all the deaths by disease and starvation and all that sort of thing. Just horrible. I just don't think it was just a waste of human life. Didn't have to happen, in my opinion. And I think slavery would have come to an end shortly. And they could have put an end to it in all but maybe 2 or 3 states and then dealt with it in other ways than war. But we don't have time to go in depth in that. But you can see this in every war, this sort of thing, and the cleanup day afterward. Verse 8 says, "And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa." And within a day or two, those bodies would have been bloated and stinking in that heat, the tropical heat there. But again, I know some of you think I get a little morbid, so I'll just move on. Verse 9 says, "And they cut off his," I'm sorry, this isn't me, it's the Bible. "And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent into the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people." Big propaganda victory here. And they don't say it in plain words. Well, in the next verse, where it says, "And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan." So his head and his armor and everything and his body, they're just like trophies. They nailed his naked body to the wall in Bethshan. Bethshan means house of ivory or house of sleep. It's according to your dictionary of names and things you look up. But it was a territory that was allotted to the half-tribe of Manasseh. Manasseh was one of the 2 sons of Joseph with Ephraim, or Ephraim, as some of you say. But contrary to what replacement theology teachers claim, as we see here, the land was never fully in control of Israel, and they never got rid of all the Canaanites, which was part of the promised land promise. God did his part, but he would only go as far as Israel would do their part. If you go back and read, we don't have time to, but Exodus 23, 20 through 31, a reference to God having an angel with a capital A, referring to a pre-incarnate Jesus. And he tells them that, if they keep the covenant, he'll wipe them out and get rid of those Canaanites, but if they won't, he won't. And that's how it went down. God never fulfilled the full Palestinian covenant he made with Abraham for the land because of Israel, because they didn't keep his covenant. They didn't circumcise their children consistently. They didn't observe the feast faithfully. They didn't rid the land of idolatry, especially the high places. We'll see they went 490 years without giving the land its jubilee of rest every 70 years. And so, or 7 years. And so you add up all those jubilee years, it's 70. And so that's why later when he comes and takes Judah out of the land with Babylon, he keeps them in Babylon for 70 years to give the land the rest that they refused to give them, and so forth. So Judah, the kingdom, and Israel before the split, they just never did what they were supposed to do. And so the promise that the replacement theologian claims was already fulfilled was not. What they'll do is they'll go to Joshua 21, 43 through 45, and it says, "And the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he sware to give unto their fathers, and they possessed it and dwelt therein. And the Lord gave them rest round about according to all that he sware unto their fathers, and there stood not a man of all their enemies before them. And the Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. There failed not aught of any good thing which the Lord had spoken unto the house of Israel, all came to pass." And yeah, that it kind of does sound, if you take it out of context, but go read after that from that point to the rest of the book of Joshua, and you'll see that was God doing his part, but they didn't do their part. No man could stand before them when they drove them out, but they didn't drive them all out. And they can control any of the land that they went to possess, but they didn't go to possess it all. See? And you'll see that if you read the rest of Joshua. And then when we got into the book of Judges, we saw right in the first chapter, Judges 1:21. This is after Joshua, is over and we're going into the time of the judges. Joshua 1:21, and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. Verse 27 of Judges 1, neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean, which is where we're at right now, and her towns. But the Canaanites would dwell in that land. That's how the verse ends, and so forth. That's why the land is still not fully conquered at the time of the death of Saul, and they're still coming in and taking his body and doing what they're doing. And that's who nailed Saul, his body, his corpse minus the head, to a wall, and then used his head and his armor as trophies. That's the situation. As we go to verse 11, just read the rest of the chapter here. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshean and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. They had to burn it. It's probably, I don't know if they could have buried it. It was probably so disgusting and bloated and so forth. Verse 13, and they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. That's how the reign of Saul ends. And you may recall that that's what Samuel prophesied when he was brought up. I don't believe he was brought up by the witch of Endor, by the way, but back in 1 Samuel 28, she was calling on him, and the Lord brought Samuel up to make one last statement. And part of what he said was in verse 19 of 1 Samuel 28. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. Boom. That's what was fulfilled right here. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. And Samuel's words also make some believe that in spite of his many failures and this very bad ending to his life, Saul went to paradise to be with Samuel. He said, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. So Saul was rebellious through much of his reign. He rejected God's instructions. He rebelled. He was just downright wicked. He had a foul spirit. He sought the word of a familiar spirit under the guise of Samuel through a witch, in which God actually does bring up Samuel. And yet, he had demonstrated great humility before coming to power. That's back in 1 Samuel 9 and 10. And he was anointed of God. Even David acknowledged that fact, that he was God's anointed. You still have free will. And so you have those words of Samuel to consider whether or not Saul's in heaven. Is he in heaven? People ask me. I can just say I hope so. I mean, as disgusting as he was at times, I don't wish hell on him or anybody else for that matter. But my wish, my opinion, your opinion, it doesn't matter. I mean, I find it incredible on a human level. I think Samuel's words, though, hold the greatest weight. So the important thing for the rest of us is to be saved and go to heaven, and that way we can look for him when we're there. In the meantime, if the Lord leaves us here, we're going to jump into 2 Samuel next time. As I say, Lord willing, and the church don't rise. But it'll include a psalm, by the way, that David wrote as a tribute to Saul. And we'll see that. I'd like to end this study with some of David's psalm of deliverance that he wrote sometime after becoming king, but it was about this time of Saul's death. In Psalm 18, it says, to the chief musician, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spake unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. And he said, I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. We sing that chorus. The sorrows of death compassed me, or compassed me, and the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell compassed me about. The snares of death prevented me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him even into his ears. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken, because he was wroth. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub and did fly. Yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. At the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire.